Chapter 12. Magnus broke the silence first. That was a purely defensive move. They were threatening to drop biological weapons down on us. We had to defend the planet's native fauna somehow, he said, with a self-righteous tone of voice. Linda sighed, but it was the clean man who responded. Well, we now know the consequences of that decision. And as I argued back then, it was just desperation that led them to suggest that course of action. They never really threatened anything. They simply stated that they wanted to fulfill the purpose that they had been striving towards for centuries, not having enough imagination or a collective decision-making base to pivot away. And our actions took away any possibility of them being able to redefine their destiny. You speak as if they have no free will, as if they have no capacity for self-determination. They could have damn well changed their goals at any time, but they didn't. No, instead they chose to religiously cling to the holy mission given to them by long-dead Earth politicians. It is idiotic, and I feel no remorse at all for what we did, said Magnus. She wondered what they had done. More than threatening to bomb the station, that was clear. But she kept silent, watching and listening. She noticed Linda watching her, gauging her reaction to what now spilled out of the men. We caused them to stagnate. I remember you saying that was their plan, to keep them too busy to be able to even think about dropping their biologicals down on us, said the clean man. While it's not like we actually had a nuke laying around, or they called our bluff. We could not take the chance. Linda saw that as well as I did. We had to act. And what we did was the least dangerous plan we had. Minimal damage, said Magnus. Well, clearly not, argued the clean man in a raised voice. As she just told us, what we did not only stopped them from making any changes or any plans, it caused them to become overworked to the point that they took their own lives rather than go on like that. I tried to argue that when we were deciding what to do, that they just wanted to be free of the obligation of keeping the station going. Maybe if we had simply offered them to come down here now and then for a little holiday or detach a bit, things could be different. Or they could have used that opportunity to bring down biologicals that would have invaded our lands and habitats, Magnus argued, but now less forcefully than before. Linda, the woman, shifted a bit and looked at both of the men in turn. They both fell back slightly. Then she looked back at her and said, Fear brings out the worst in us. We did things that we now regret. She gave a slight nod at Magnus, who nodded back and looked at the clean man. They seemed to reconcile wordlessly, Linda having stated their shared stance. When we first came to this planet, we were young scientists funded by the politicians on Earth. Linda began in a measured voice. We were all very idealistic at first. We were here to be biological pioneers, here to help birth a new planet's biosphere. We created new organisms that could survive outside in Mars, in small pockets here and there where there was enough atmospheric pressure. These were derivatives of lichen and moss, hardy pioneers that on Earth were generally the first to colonize new land. They break down rock and leave behind mineral-rich soil where other, more complicated life could later grow. They also help spread bacteria necessary for healthy soil. And as the atmospheric pressure grew, we saw these organisms migrate to higher and higher altitudes, and the places they had first taken to, in the lower high-pressure zones, we began to see more complex plants that we seeded survive. It was wondrous, Linda said in a gentle, subdued voice. But as we reported our successes to Earth, their response was to build the station, where they intended to have Terran-based biologicals acclimate to Martian gravity and lower atmospheric pressure, then seed them down on Martian soil. They gave our ecology an expiration date, as the Terran one was engineered to outgrow any competitor and take over, bringing the greed-driven monoculture that had played a significant part in destroying the biological diversity on Earth well before the war and the century of storms. Magnus got up and said, Then the war on Earth set us free, then strode over to tend to a cluster of grow pots that surrounded the room. Linda continued, Once Earth became engulfed in war, we realized the plan to change Mars into Earth Mark II was no longer in the cards, that we now had full autonomy over the Mars experiment. She turned to the clean man and passed him the vape she had been puffing and whispered, Thank you, Stan, dear, and turned back to her and continued. So we came together and discussed what to do. All the settlements were represented and everyone had a voice. Afterwards, we voted on some areas of disagreement or found compromises. We took a lot of writing from Oldest Manifesto and made our own version, where we laid out some rules and frameworks for human influence on the Martian biosphere. Stan cut in seamlessly. My great-grandfather came up with the idea of the Sharing Symposium, where once every 4 years we would get together and show what we have been working on since the last games. We show off our plants and bacteria, entire micro-ecosystems, new ways of maintaining more complex ecologies harmoniously and sustainably. And with a clear note of pride said, finding clever and interesting ways of doing useful stuff. And then, said Magnus from over by the plants, everything is shared, so we can learn from each other's successes and failures. Linda continued, So you see, when the station people said they were planning to deploy their cargo down on us, they were threatening centuries of our cultural heritage. So we threatened them with a bluff. We never had a rocket to launch at them. And even if we did, I don't believe we would have ever voted to use them. We are not evil. Or I want to believe that we are good people. Stan reached out and put a hand on her shoulder. She touched it briefly in turn, her gaze remaining distant. As she had been quietly observing and listening, puzzling it together, they had clearly done more than just bluffing a launch of a non-existent nuke, and then it clicked. You caused the cascades, she said matter-of-factly. Linda looked at her, her eyes glazed over, a crack in her polished composure. Stan began. It was the course of... But Linda interrupted him. We thought it was the path of least damage. We made it so that there would be regular flares of problems that would keep them too busy repairing to think of anything else. It worked exactly as planned in the beginning, so we assumed that it continued working as planned. Admittedly, there was an element of turning a blind eye. We never checked on the status of the station beyond seeing that it was still functioning from the outside. But now you are here telling us that we have turned their heaven into hell. I don't know how to. She trailed off. They all just sat there for a moment, except Magnus, who kept going between grow boxes, checking on the plants. She broke the silence first. They still don't know the cause of the cascades up there. Are you able to fix it so that they stop happening? That depends, understand. It's been running for a long time. We would have to go and check on it in person. It is definitely doable, but it may take work. We would need to bring a few people with us to be sure that we get all of it, said Magnus, walking past the table to tend to plants on the other side of the room. All of what? She asked. We created a simple AI and snuck it into their systems. It was programmed to wake up at regular intervals and compromise some systems. Not enough to threaten the station, but enough so that the station people would have their hands full. She thought of her friend, the AI, and the slaved AI from her city. You forced an AI to spend decades trapped in their systems causing damage? She said with shock in her voice. Catching her tone, this reaction brought Linda back into focus. What do you know about AIs? I know that an AI is probably in special hell if you forced it into that situation, she answered accusingly. Linda raised an eyebrow. You are thinking of a personality-based AI, Linda said, intrigued by her strong emotional reaction, making the assumption that she knew more than she was telling. The one we sent up was made from scratch. Just a complicated program with very limited self-awareness and no emotions whatsoever. She smiled reassuringly, waiting a pause for her to take that in. She then went on. Where have you heard of a personality-based synthetic intelligence before? She did not answer, and yet she could not hide her agitation. Linda shifted her position and went on. They were created a long time ago by Oldest and some of the 500. The technology to fully copy a consciousness, as they apparently did, is so far beyond anything we can imagine. To create an extension to a living soul. Stan jumped in. The 500 became something else. Once the PBAIs came to be, they were the architects of humanity's path towards the stars, he said with a dramatic flair. Linda continued. There are some religiously minded people who point to it as proof that Oldest must be a god and claim that the 500 are blessed saints or even angels, here to protect humanity from itself. She grinned, clearly not of that opinion. As far as we know, all the PBAIs left the solar system centuries back to direct missions to colonize the galaxy one solar system at a time. Magnus chimed in. Or to seek out and make contact with alien life. Yes, I suppose we don't really know, not being privy to their plans. But they have not been seen around the inner planets for centuries, to our knowledge. She had calmed down a bit by now, but this was a lot to take in. I met some of them, she said finally, on Earth and on the moon. All three of them straightened up, and Magnus even stopped gardening and came closer, wiping his dirt-covered hands on his clothes. You met them? He asked, his voice sharp with interest. And they spoke to you? All three of them hung on her every word as she told them about her experiences on Earth and the one on Luna. As she spoke, she realized she was leading towards the one she had been hiding so carefully, Elise in the tablet. She was hesitant. However, she had already felt an urge to tell them when she learned that they were capable of creating AIs, even inferior ones. Maybe they could help Elise. So she told them. She told them about how she had found the tablet and how the AI within had helped her escape the revolution. How for a brief moment it had come fully alive, only to go back into hibernation. She told them about how she learned about the slaved AI from the first city, and then how she had met the crazy AI in the dead city, the one in the ocean city, and finally the voice on Luna. Linda, Stan, and Magnus watched her agape, drinking in every word spoken. Then, when she stopped speaking, they sat there silent for a moment. The vibrations from the grow boxes filled the space. It was a calming sound, as if the plants were silently humming. Finally, Stan spoke in a gentle voice. "Can we see this tablet?" Careful not to unnerve her, the three of them all looked at her reverently now, wanting to believe but needing proof. She pulled up the tablet, but kept it close to her. The others made no move to reach for it, yet their eyes widened noticeably, and they leaned in for a better view. Then Vicky reappeared, breaking the spell. "What did I miss?" he asked, chuckling at the serious vibe emanating from the room. Linda recovered first and said, "How about that? You are an interesting person indeed, and I very much look forward to further conversations. However, I think we all need a moment to digest and rest." She got up and stretched her hands in the air and nodded towards the tablet and said, "Perhaps you will allow us to examine that treasure you have there tomorrow, and we will see how we can help. I make no promise other than we will do our absolute best." Linda then pointed to the red-haired giant. "Vicky will show you where you can rest and clean up. If you need anything, let him know." She thanked them, stood up, and nodded to the two men who gazed at her smiling with quiet reverence now. Then she followed Vicky through the winding hallways and domes. This place felt pretty cozy to her, with diverse plants growing from anywhere they could stick a box with lights. The station had been wonderful as well, with its vast green fields and farmlands floating in orbit, surrounded by the cold vacuum of space. Down here, the green corridors formed such a contrast with the seemingly lifeless landscapes outside the building. Vicky was playing the tour guide. He told her about canyons and valleys where the atmosphere was thicker, and an ecosystem of different life forms had taken hold. She tried to imagine some exotic plants huddled together in dark and hostile environments. Life was amazing. So much to explore. Vicky led her to a room that was adjacent to one of the biodome grow spaces. He showed her where the washroom was, how to use the toilet, and then, seeing how tired she was, he bid her good night, leaving her alone in this strange place. She longed for sleep, but this day, crazy. There was so much to think about. She found a bench in the biodome and laid back on it, gazing up through the gently swaying plants at the Martian sky. It was odd somehow to be on a different planet and yet see the same constellations. She lay there for a while, thinking about the day and preparing for tomorrow. Her shadow self snuck in, wanting to obsess on the fact that she seemed to be stuck there. No way forward off Mars. She dismissed that thought. She might not see it now, but she would find a way. She had made it this far. She thought about how the conflict between the station and the people down here on the planet, how it would change now that the people down here knew the station intended to change, and that they could no longer hide in ignorance over the consequences of their actions. She thought about the tablet and Elise. the angel on life support within. She did not regret telling the three about it, and she hoped that it would not change. It was worth a risk if there was a chance that they could help. Eventually, exhaustion won out. She made her way to the room and climbed into the bed. She was asleep in seconds and did not wake until late the next morning. She had a pleasant moment of confusion as she was waking. The filtered sunlight casting a soft glow above the bed was unlike anything she had ever woken to, reminding her of where she was and all that had happened and was going to happen. She sat outside her room in the biodome with a tablet resting in her hands. She was tempted to try and wake up Elise, the ghost in the shell, to let her know what was happening and ask her for guidance. However, she feared it would risk using up the last of her precious life force, or chi, or whatever it was that was keeping her alive. She felt guilty over having woken her up on Luna. She had felt justified in the moment, with no other way of getting up off the moon. The competition on the line. Now, though, she was not as sure. Part of her thought that she could have figured it out without Elise, if she had just tried harder and trusted herself. So she would do that now, herself and the Martians. She heard the rhythmic sound of Viggy's long stride a moment later. "Good morning, my lady," he said, with a humorous tone and with a regal bow. He had clearly been updated on yesterday's conversation. This joke was getting old, she thought, following her across the solar system. She just smirked and stood up. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Well enough. I feel rested and ready," she replied. "Good to hear," said Viggy. "I was told to let you sleep in and then feed you. The others have been up for a while, preparing and contacting the other bases. Your arrival has already shook up things around here." "I'm sorry, I did not mean to." She began to apologize, but Viggy cut in. "No, don't be. It's great. Finally, something exciting other than plants and bugs. I'm looking forward to the coming days." He lifted his hands, palm open, indicating the way to go. Hungry? She was famished, so she followed him into a nearby room where food was already spread out on a table, along with some vials of juices. It all tasted odd. Not bad, just odd. "What are these?" she asked, indicating some colorful fruits on the table. "Those are some of our native delicacies," Big answered, grabbing one and biting into it. He then gave her some names and descriptions that she could not remember later. While she ate, he explained how the first Martians had arrived here with limited seed stocks, having anticipated easy supplies from Earth. However, when the war struck, they had doubled the efforts already begun to develop crops and plants that could survive and grow on Mars with the available nutrients and microbiome. They bred countless variations using gene editing and every other trick in the book. New strains to fill up every nutritional need of the human body. They had no animals to help produce some of the complex vitamins and aminos needed to keep healthy. So the Martian community of biochemists, bioengineers, astrobiologists, and all other fields of science had come together and developed the Games of Growth festivals to award those achievements that improved life for all of us here on Mars, said Viggy and clapped his stomach. My favorite part being the culinary challenge. They finished eating and went to the auditorium room they had been in yesterday. There were 5 people there already in deep discussion. She recognized Linda and Magnus, who was now all cleaned up and wearing sparkling white overalls. The other 3 new people looked to be similar in age as the three she already knew. They stopped speaking when they noticed her and Vicky entering the room, and Linda stood up. "Good morning, dear. I hope you slept well." Then, indicating the new people, Linda said, "Allow me to introduce yous, Alice and Imani. They just arrived from a neighboring settlement." The three nodded their greetings to her. "They will be joining us later when we take a look at your tablet. We are expecting some others to arrive in the next few hours for our Congress." Hughes did a slight bow towards her, which she reciprocated. "I will be honored to help in any way I can." "We called in all the relevant experts," Magnus said. "If there's a way we can help you with a tablet, they will find it." The three all nodded at that and seemed to be about to speak further, but some more people walked in. She backed away off to the side as all the people hugged and greeted each other. She noticed one very old-looking woman who gave her a little wave when she noticed her watching. The woman looked like an elder among old elders, and it was clear that the others had great respect for her by the way they approached. She also noticed a woman with bright red hair who strode right up to Magnus and hugged him and kissed him with almost awkward intimacy. The two of them walked out to the side and fell into deep conversation, not getting up as even more people arrived. She watched and studied the people arriving. Growing up around her mother's parties had taught her to read people's interactions and hierarchies. She saw a very different crowd from those of her mother's friends. However, she did see the similar type of social games and behaviors. Linda waved her over and introduced her to some of the arrivals, promising them a chance to speak with her later. There were many conversations going on. She tried to listen in on the ones most interesting to her. "And we plan to create a way to neutralize the saboteur algorithms on the station. I am abhorred to learn how it has plagued the caretakers," the older woman said with an emotional timbre in her voice. "As I see it, they were just doing the best they could with an impossibly difficult situation. The fact that they stayed and kept that place going all this time is a mark of their dedication. I truly hope that through time we can earn their forgiveness and find some common ground to work towards," said Imani. The woman with the red hair had returned to the crowd, and she scoffed at Imani. "There is no common ground. The station's only goal is to turn our beautiful red planet into another Earth. If we had not acted, they would have surely destroyed our way of life by now," said the red-haired woman aggressively. Yes, said the old woman dismissively. "We all know your thoughts on this matter." As even more people arrived, the conversation spread out around the room. Many would come to shortly introduce themselves to her. Some asked her questions about herself, Earth, and her experiences. She answered curtly and asked them in turn about their work. She quickly realized just how very knowledgeable they were about plants and how to maintain ecosystems in challenging situations. She thought that if this group's knowledge were to find its way to the cities on Earth, things might drastically improve for her city. It seemed that the challenges of surviving in space could teach people back on Earth important lessons. More people arrived, and then more. They seemed to all arrive in threes. She had stopped trying to remember everyone's names as they introduced themselves, and then merged into one of the nearby conversations. Linda knocked a little hammer on the podium in the center of the room, and in the quiet that followed, announced, "Our last group has just arrived. Let's give them a moment to get settled, and then we begin our preliminaries in 30 minutes." The last trio came into the room a few moments later. A young man around Viggy's age, who seemed to have a similarly relaxed demeanor about him, a woman about the same age as Linda, her gaze darting around attentively. The third man really caught her attention. The man looked properly ancient. He had wrinkles on his wrinkles, making her think of fractals, folds within folds. And yet he stood straight and walked with confidence. Linda joined them as they came over to her to introduce themselves. "This is Jacob, the oldest man on Mars, and our leading expert on AI." "Call me Jake," said Jacob, smiling brightly at her, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. "I understand you have some very important insights to share with us. I am looking forward to hearing of your adventures. I am told we will start on the topic of the station, and then after this session is over, we will take a look at your tablet." The other two greeted her as well before finding their seats close to the center stage. The formal meeting began soon after. Linda thanked everyone for coming on such short notice, and then explained the outline for the next 2 days. Linda then looked at her and invited her to come up on stage to tell them about her experience on the station. She stood up and joined Linda behind the podium. She looked out at all the new faces, eagerly awaiting to hear what she had to say. She began by telling them how she and Bill had arrived and met Guy, the overloaded caretaker who was struggling to keep his part of the station in repair. She told them how she and Bill had helped Guy work through the task list while getting the chance to see the beautiful interior inside the station. The vast fields, the roaming animals, the flowing rivers. She told them how the idea of inviting people who were struggling on Earth and on Luna to come and join the station, to make a home there and help keep the station working. How Guy had called together all the other caretakers who had not spoken in years, and how they had decided to send Guy with Bill, who were now on their way Earthside to pick up the first new station colonists. She then looked to Linda, who smiled approvingly and indicated that she could sit down again. "We know our side of the story, and now we have insight into theirs." She paused and gazed over the assembled Martians. "I called this meeting so that we could discuss and decide what our next step is. The station has suffered by our actions for decades. Although our plans did have their desired effect, the caretakers have stagnated, and no move was made to interfere with the work we have dedicated ourselves towards. However, now that stands to change. With new people emigrating to the station from Earth, they will free themselves from the constraints we placed upon them, and they may very well discover our part in it, causing them to vie for retribution. How shall we act?" said Linda, and then paused a moment, looking around at the gathered representatives of the Martian community. "The floor is open." She sat back down. There was some low-volume chatter before the red-haired woman, who had been so affectionate before, got up and took the floor. Everyone else became silent as she began to speak. "We are here because all those decades ago we chose to protect this novel foothold of life from becoming nothing more than a farm to feed on expansion that never came. I believe that we were entirely justified in our actions back then, and I think we did not go far enough. While that station hangs in orbit around us, we remain a hair's width from extinction. The woman spoke passionately and with strong conviction. She looked around and saw that some of the heads in the room were nodding in agreement. The woman continued, "As I advocated back then, I feel that the only way to ensure our long-term safety is to destroy the station. If we do not act, then it is a question of when and not if they decide to launch death upon us. And this news of an immigration policy, well-intentioned as it is," the red-haired woman said, nodding towards her, "means that one day the population of the station will look down upon the Martian expanse with the hunger for growth that has always plagued Terran culture, until someone makes the move that ends our way of living. We have no choice. We must find a way to end the threat before it grows out of our control." The woman concluded and went to sit down again.